Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Olufunso Shumarin. I lead the AFDB's work on climate change and green growth within the East African region, based out of Nairobi. It gives me a very great pleasure to be part of this conversation today. Thanks again to the organizers for extending an invitation to us. I wish I could be there in person, but all the same, very happy to connect. I and I think it's very important to appreciate the conversation we are having today. And why do I say that? It may not necessarily sound like a new conversation. It may, actually be a conversation that we've been having. But I think over the years we have sharpened our ability to really unpack the reality and the complexity of the issue in a way that is very relevant to Africa. So, when, as much as we're talking about a global issue around climate finance flows, just transition, adaptation, I think having an African lens to it is very critical. And I'm happy that we're having this Africa Regional Forum as we move towards COP27. I also like to emphasize the fact that the bank, the African Development Bank Group, has been at the forefront of some of the latest thinking, some of the latest ideas, engagement. The bank continues to use its convening power to shape new thoughts, new ideas within many African countries, but also between different layers of stakeholders on the African continent. And I take particular note of the fact that we're focusing on climate actions and we're linking that to SDGs. And I think if there's any continent that where this is most relevant, it is this beautiful continent of Africa. And I'm happy to be part of this conversation today. In the interest of time, I want to limit my interventions around financing just transition to three key points. Point number one, and the first I want to say, and oftentimes we don't recognize this enough, is what I call the power of framing. And I learned in many years of work and study as well that how you frame an issue in the global politics or in the policy space very much determines how you allocate value to it. So if I frame climate change as a challenge or as a burden, then the values that are located tends to be more about fighting a burden. And obviously, you can't ignore that. But in the same vein, if I allocate a value to climate change based on my framing of it being an opportunity, my mindset, my approach, my systems are also different. And I think it's very important for us to start with that point that in Africa we continue to encourage countries, and we're beginning to see it and appreciate it, that just transition and the whole notion of what it represents and what it means, it's an opportunity. And you can pause for a moment to reflect on that. It is an opportunity for us to follow a low carbon development pathway. It is an opportunity to build a prosperous Africa that is also climate resilient. And it's also an opportunity for us to be able to achieve our development goals, those SDG goals, in a way where we don't compromise the values and the interests of both the present and future generation. And it sounds as simplistic as you can imagine, but it's a very powerful thing to recognize the power of framing. And it's something that I personally, in my role, encourage countries to look into. How do you frame these issues that we're talking about? Do you see them as an opportunity? And I think that opportunity will, if you frame it as such, as an opportunity, it translates into the investment planning the countries are making. It translates into how you're mainstreaming that into your sectoral policies. It translates into the capacity building. It translates into the institutional strengthening. All of those things that we talk about, institutional strengthening, capacity building, technology transfer. I think for me, they are the second layer. The first layer is how do we frame the issue? Because even if it's a global phenomenon, actions are still taken national level, and how actions are framed or how the issue is framed nationally, it's very key. And I think in the course of this conversation, you're going to keep hearing a lot about some of the things we should be doing differently. But again, They can only happen if we frame it as an opportunity and not as a challenge. The second point that I want to raise, and I think is very key, is the issue of the fact that as we speak today, um, I don't personally believe that the quantum of money that we need to achieve the just transition is not there. I think in the global economy of today, in the global financial and economic system of today, the trillions of dollars that we need are currently in existence. They are there in our global economy. Then the question is, what is the challenge? Believe strongly that the challenge is what I call a distribution challenge. Because whilst we're talking about limited capital in a part of the world where those capitals are most needed, we're still talking about abundant capital in another part of the world where perhaps they may not be most needed. And so when you look at it as a system, as a whole, we don't, money is not necessarily scarce. The biggest challenge is distribution. And then the thought is, how do we move finance? How do we allow finance to flow from where it is most abundant and perhaps less needed to where it is least abundant and most needed? Think of that as a matrix, a two by two matrix. What in terms of abundance or and need. And I think it's very important because everything we're trying to do, whether we're trying in innovating new instruments, whether we're blending instrument together, debt and grant in a way, whether we're providing guarantees, and I'm sure other speakers will talk about the innovations we've done so far. I want to stand from a very upstream, overarching position to be able to say, why do we do what we do? And I think it's very important. It's a conversation we must continuously engage ourselves in. And I think why do we do that? We are doing that because we're trying to solve a distribution challenge. And what I think is very important in the African context, and I like to speak to the realities of Africa, is that we need to help our countries to understand the global financial system, the language of money. Money is not necessarily scarce. Money is just not evenly distributed. And if you need to move money from where it is most available to where it is most needed, then we must be able to understand. So all of those innovations about instruments, and I wouldn't have time to go into them, you know them. All of those things about the new thinking around bonds, the new thinking around swaps, or we are blending grants with concessional loans to manage first losses and eventually bringing equity into it. All we're trying to do is to move money and solve the distribution challenge. And I think it's very important to reflect deeply on what that means in the course of climate action and financing SDGs going forward. How do we move trillions from where they are most abundant to where they are most needed in order to be able to achieve these development goals that impact on all of us, all of us. The third point, and I'm very mindful of time, and that it's very important to understand that the finance as a thing, finance as a goal, as a concept, as a mechanism, whatever it is that finance means to you or to any country, finance does not happen or does not exist in an institutional vacuum. Money just does not drop. Money or finance is nested within uh, multiple layers of strategic partnerships. Is nested within systems of incentives, is nested within, you know, state and society interactions in a way. And I think it's very important to recognize that. So what I really think, and I'm hoping that we can reflect a lot more, is what kind of, what forms or what new modes of strategic partnerships do we need to build in order to be able to catalyze financial flows for climate actions in Africa. And we're going to look at it from different levels. You're going to look at it between state to state. You're going to look at it between public to private. You're going to look at it between national to subnational. You're going to look at it between state and non-state actors, and those layers. And we must be able to understand and be able to map within each country what are the strategic partnerships that are necessary, that must be in place, and for those partnerships to thrive, what are the institutional arrangements and and policy incentives that we need to put in place, or perhaps an enabling environment for those partnerships to come together. It's very, very important. So and I think it's important for us to reflect on that. Um, I I didn't plan to give you numbers, you know. You probably have read that, you know that. What I think is important is for us to step out of what we do and to think conceptually um, in around what do we need to do differently and going forward. And that also comes from the fact that we must have a full idea and a full understanding of the work that we do. Lastly, at the African Development Bank, we'll continue to put forward an agenda that, you know, a climate action in the African context is not going to be separate from a development um, system or development approach. So we don't do climate change projects a standalone climate change project. What we do is climate informed development project, and that's why we make sure that climate action, whether for mitigation or adaptation, are mainstream in all our development interventions across forward. I like to say that this is the beginning of a long conversation. There's also the beginning of a long friendship, and if at any point there is an opportunity for us to work together, I think it's an opportunity that we cannot say no to. Thank you very much, and I'm hoping that the rest of the conversation will be very fruitful. Thank you.